Jake set his drink down on the table, fingers tapping against the cool glass as he studied Lena across from him. She looked effortlessly poised, her red lips curled in that familiar smirk, the one she always wore when she thought she was in control. "I just need space, Jake," she said, swirling her wine slowly, deliberately. Her voice was light, almost playful, as if she were presenting some trivial request rather than testing the very foundation of their marriage. "I need time to figure things out." Jake had been with Lena long enough to recognize the game she was playing. She expected resistance, a fight, pleading, maybe even a dramatic outburst, something she could later use as ammunition against him. Instead, he just nodded. Sure. The smirk faltered, just a fraction, but he caught it. "Wait, that's it?" she asked, her voice betraying the first hint of confusion. He leaned back in his chair, lifting his glass to take a slow sip before meeting her eyes. "Yeah, take all the time you need." Lena blinked, clearly thrown off by his calmness. He could almost see the gears turning in her head. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. He was supposed to panic. He was supposed to beg her to stay, to tell her she was the love of his life, that he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. But Jake wasn't that man anymore. He had been, once. He had spent years playing the devoted husband, always the one to mend the cracks in their relationship, always willing to shoulder the weight of her indecisiveness. But tonight? Tonight, something inside him shifted. He saw her for what she was, a woman who fed on control, who dangled affection like a prize, who needed validation in the form of his suffering. "Not this time." Lena straightened in her seat, crossing her arms. "I mean, I just think we've been together so long that maybe a little distance could, make us appreciate each other more." "Maybe," Jake agreed, his tone even, "or maybe it'll just make things clearer." Now she frowned. "Clearer?" Jake only smiled, setting his drink down. He wasn't going to explain himself. He wasn't going to hand her a reaction she could twist into some victory. Lena's fingers tightened around her wineglass. "Well, I guess we'll see then. Guess we will." And with that, Jake stood up, tossed a few bills on the table, and walked out without another word. Lena had been expecting a fight. Instead, she got silence. And deep down, she knew she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Lena sat in stunned silence long after Jake had walked out of the restaurant. She traced the rim of her wineglass with one manicured finger, her mind racing in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had thought he would at least argue, maybe demand an explanation, or try to convince her that they were worth saving. Instead, he had left with an ease that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The night stretched on, the dim glow of the restaurant lights blurring as she scrolled through her phone absent-mindedly. No texts, no missed calls, not even a simple "Are you okay?" from Jake. A strange, unfamiliar tension crept into her chest. He was supposed to react. That was the whole point. By the time she got home, the silence in their apartment was almost suffocating. She kicked off her heels, expecting to hear the usual sound of Jake in the kitchen or the TV murmuring in the background, but there was nothing, just the stillness of an empty space that suddenly felt too big. She tried to shake it off. Maybe he was playing a game of his own. He would come around. She was sure of it. He always did. The first sign that something was off came the next morning. Lena woke up to an unusually quiet house. Normally, Jake would be in the kitchen making coffee, his predictable routine as steady as the sunrise. But when she walked in, the coffee machine sat untouched. His keys weren't on the counter where he usually left them. The small but significant traces of him, the things she had grown so used to that she barely noticed them, were missing. A nagging unease settled in her stomach as she reached for her phone. She had expected a message from him, something indicating that he had at least spent the night thinking about her request. Instead, the screen was blank. No texts, no calls, no signs of regret. Her fingers hovered over his name in her contact list. She debated sending him something casual, maybe a simple "good morning," or even a playful "miss me yet?" But before she could type anything, a notification popped up. It was from her friend, Sarah. "Hey, are you okay?" Elena frowned. That was an odd message. She quickly typed back, "Why wouldn't I be?" Sarah's reply came almost instantly. "I just saw Jake at the airport with Mia." Lena's entire body tensed. Mia? Her Mia? That couldn't be right. Her fingers moved faster than her thoughts as she typed, "Are you sure?" The response was brutal. "I'm sure." They looked close. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She sat down, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as her mind scrambled to make sense of it. Jake, at the airport with her best friend. That wasn't possible. That didn't make sense. Except maybe it did. A creeping realization slithered through her, cold and unwelcome. Jake hadn't argued with her. He hadn't tried to win her back. He had simply accepted her words and walked away. And now he was leaving with Mia. Lena's hands shook as she tried calling him. The phone rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. "Jake, call me back." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "We need to talk." No response. She tried again. Same result. Her frustration turned to anger, her grip tightening on the phone. This wasn't how things were supposed to happen. Jake wasn't supposed to be the one moving on. And Mia? That betrayal stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had thought she was playing a game. She had thought she was in control. But now, for the first time, she wasn't so sure. Lena's mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, disbelief. She paced the kitchen, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as if she could will Jake to call her back. The idea that he was really at the airport leaving, with Mia of all people, made her stomach twist. She had expected Jake to sulk, maybe stay with a friend for a few days, even send a late-night text telling her how much he loved her and that he didn't want to lose her. But this was something entirely different. Mia had always been the easygoing one, the one who smiled too much and laughed at Jake's jokes a little too easily. She had never been a threat. At least Lena had never considered her one, but now she saw every interaction, every shared glance between them in a new, far more dangerous light. Determined to get answers, Lena grabbed her car keys and headed out. She barely noticed the city around her as she sped toward the airport, her mind replaying every moment from last night, searching for clues she might have missed. Had Jake already been planning this? Had Mia? Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. No, this wasn't how this was supposed to go. By the time she reached the airport, she was practically vibrating with frustration. She parked haphazardly in the nearest lot and rushed inside, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her eyes scanned the departure screens, her heart hammering in her chest. "Where are you, Jake?" Then she saw them. Jake stood near the security checkpoint, his suitcase at his side, looking completely at ease. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't glancing at his phone, waiting for her to reach out. He was calm. Worse, he was smiling, and beside him, Mia. Lena's breath caught as she took in the scene. Mia was laughing, one hand lightly resting on Jake's arm as she leaned in, whispering something. He nodded, and they both looked so comfortable, as if this wasn't some shocking betrayal, as if this was normal. Rage bubbled inside Lena. Without thinking, she stormed toward them. "Jake?" Heads turned. Travelers glanced at her, curious but uninterested in the drama unfolding. But Jake, he barely reacted. His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. No guilt, no hesitation. Just acceptance. Lena stopped a few feet away, her breath shallow. She had expected shock on his face, maybe even guilt, but there was nothing. If anything, he seemed amused. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, gesturing between him and Mia. Mia had the audacity to raise an eyebrow, tilting her head slightly as if she were the one confused. "Hi, Lena," she said casually, adjusting the strap of her handbag. "Didn't expect to see you here." Lena ignored her. "Jake, are you serious? You really leaving? With her?" Jake sighed, as if he had been expecting this, as if her outrage was nothing more than an inconvenience. "You said you needed space," he said simply. "I'm giving it to you." Lena clenched her jaw. "That's not what—" Jake held up a hand. "Lena, you wanted to see what life was like without me, right? You wanted time to think. So I took you at your word. I figured I should see what life is like without you, too." Lena's mouth opened, but no words came out. She had spent years carefully constructing their relationship, making sure she was the one who held the power. She had always been the one who decided when they fought, when they made up, when things were good or bad. Jake had always been her Jake, steady, reliable, waiting for her cues. But now he was walking away. Mia gave a small, knowing smile. "We should probably get going, Jake. Our flight leaves soon." Lena turned to her, eyes flashing. You're supposed to be my best friend." Mia met her gaze without flinching. "And you were supposed to appreciate what you had," she said, her voice softer than Lena expected. "But you didn't." Jake reached down, picked up his suitcase, and turned toward security. "Take care, Lena," he said over his shoulder, and just like that, they walked away. Lena stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms. She had expected to win this game, to pull Jake back in when she was ready. Instead, she had lost everything. And for the first time, she realized she was the one left behind. Lena stood there, frozen in place as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. The sound of Jake's retreating footsteps, Mia's easy laughter. It all felt surreal, as if she'd stepped into an alternate version of her own life, where she was no longer the one in control. For years, she had dictated the pace of their relationship, knowing with absolute certainty that Jake would always be there. His love had been a constant, unwavering in the face of her moods, her mind games, her endless need for validation. And yet, here she was, watching him walk away without a single ounce of hesitation. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she took a sharp breath, forcing herself to move. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the nearest bench, collapsing onto it as she tried to process what had just happened. Her mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? When did Mia become more than just her friend? Had she ever really been her friend? But the more she tried to make sense of it, the clearer the truth became. This wasn't about Mia. This was about Jake. Jake, who had finally had enough. Jake, who had decided she wasn't worth the chase anymore. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears as she scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over Jake's name. She needed to hear his voice to get some kind of explanation that made sense. Because this didn't make sense. He loved her. He always had. Didn't he? She hit call. 1 ring, 2 rings. Voicemail. Gritting her teeth, she tried again. Voicemail? Her stomach churned. Jake never ignored her calls. He might be angry, but he always answered, even when she was being difficult. He had never shut her out like this before. Panicked, she switched tactics. Mia, her fingers flew across the screen as she typed a message, her hands shaking with frustration. But Lena, what the hell is going on, Mia? How long has this been happening? She watched the message send, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts as she waited for those 3 dots to appear. She needed Mia to tell her this was all a joke, a misunderstanding, something that could still be fixed. A minute passed. Then 2. Then, finally, Mia, I think you already know the answer to that. Lena's jaw clenched. That wasn't good enough. Lena, are you serious? You just decided to go after my husband? What kind of friend does that? She hit send, barely taking a breath before another message popped up. Mia, what kind of wife plays games with a man who actually loves her? The words stung. Lena blinked at the screen, rereading the message as a lump formed in her throat. No, this wasn't how this was supposed to happen. She was supposed to be the one calling the shots. She was supposed to be the one making Jake come back to her, proving that he couldn't live without her. But instead, he had walked away first. And worse, he wasn't looking back. She clenched her fists, shoving her phone into her bag as she stood abruptly. She needed air. She needed to do something. Her mind latched onto the only thing that made sense. She needed to go home. The drive back to their apartment was a blur, her grip on the wheel too tight, her breath coming too fast. By the time she unlocked the door and stepped inside, she was barely holding herself together. But the second she walked in, the full force of what was happening hit her like a punch to the gut. Jake's things were gone, not just a few items, not just a bag or a hastily packed suitcase. The closet that had once been half filled with his neatly pressed shirts, empty. His shoes by the door, gone. The framed photos of them on the bookshelf, missing. Lena's breath hitched. She stumbled forward, yanking open drawers, searching for something, anything that proved he hadn't really left, that this was just a statement, a way to scare her, to make her realize what she was losing. But there was nothing, just empty spaces where Jake used to be. Lena sank onto the bed, staring at the room that suddenly felt too big, too lifeless, too cold. Her own reflection in the mirror across from her looked different, less composed, more lost. Her phone buzzed. For a split second, hope surged inside her. She scrambled to grab it, only for her stomach to drop at the sight of the message. From Jake, just one image. A photo of him on a sunlit beach, drink in hand, sunglasses on, looking as relaxed as she had ever seen him. And beside him? Yeah. Lena's heart pounded as she stared at the picture, her hands gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, another message. Jake, you said you needed space. I'm just giving it to you. Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned. For the first time, Lena felt something she hadn't anticipated. Regret. Real soul-crushing regret. And the terrifying realization that for the first time in their relationship, Jake wasn't coming back. Lena sat motionless on the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the phone as if the image on the screen might somehow change. But it wouldn't. No amount of staring would make Jake disappear from that beach. No amount of wishing would erase the way he looked. Free, happy, untouched by the chaos she was drowning in. Her breath came shallow and uneven. This isn't real. It can't be real. But it was. Jake was gone. And he wasn't just gone for a night or a few days to cool off. He wasn't waiting for her to call so he could come back, pretending none of this had ever happened. He had made a decision, one without her input, without her permission, and now she was the one left picking up the pieces. Her phone slipped from her grasp, landing on the bed beside her. The apartment felt unbearably quiet, as if Jake had taken the very air with him when he walked out. How had it come to this? She had always thought she was the one in control, the one steering their relationship. She had been so sure that when she said jump, Jake would ask how high. She had thought she could push, pull away, dangle him over the edge of uncertainty just to make herself feel wanted, needed. She had been so wrong. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, the sound hollow and humorless. She had expected to teach him a lesson, but she was the one who had learned something instead. Jake knew his worth. And worse, Mia had seen it too. The betrayal twisted inside her, sharp and merciless. Mia, the woman she had confided in, the woman she had trusted, the woman who had stood beside her for years. How long had she been waiting for Lena to mess up? Had she always been there in the background watching, knowing Jake deserved better? Lena's fingers curled into fists, but the anger fizzled as quickly as it came. Because deep down, she knew the truth. Jake did deserve better, and for the first time in her life, she was the one on the outside looking in, realizing far too late that she had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. And this time, there was no getting him back.